60 years ago, Star Trek shattered TV history with the first-ever interracial kiss, boldly redefining sci-fi forever. But behind the legendary glow of the USS Enterprise, the real lives of its crew plummeted into unimaginable darkness. How did William Shatner, the invincible Captain Kirk, survive a harrowing personal tragedy, only to finally reach space at 90 and chillingly declare that all he saw was death? And what horrifying sequence of events stripped Nichelle Nichols, a pioneering civil rights icon, of her freedom, trapping her in a bitter, highly publicized legal nightmare? Let's look back at the shocking 60-year evolution of the Star Trek cast to uncover the devastating truths hidden behind the stars. Number 1. William Shatner, a lonely captain's tragic fight beyond the stars. Back in the 1960s, while television was still struggling to find new heroic archetypes, William Shatner stepped up and redefined everything. As Captain James T. Kirk, he was the absolute center of the cinematic universe, a definitive symbol of masculinity and America's grand desire for conquest. Audiences were captivated by his confident smirk, his unwavering gaze, and that arrogant yet undeniably magnetic swagger. Sitting in the captain's chair of the USS Enterprise, Shatner seemed to hold the entire galaxy in the palm of his hand, a blinding star that would never fade. That is the pristine, golden memory the public holds of him, an invincible sci-fi hero who always knew exactly how to guide his crew through any storm. But when the bright studio lights dimmed, the real-life journey of this captain plummeted into a much darker, colder void. The harsh reality was that behind the scenes, Shatner was tangled in bitter, decades-long feuds with his own Enterprise co-stars. These deep fractures exposed a raw, unforgiving side of showbiz, a place where massive egos constantly collide in a cutthroat industry, proving that the flawless on-screen unity was sometimes nothing more than a well-crafted illusion deceiving the audience. Yet, the true cost of fame went far beyond tabloid drama. The ultimate tragedy struck in 1999, completely shattering the captain's world, when he discovered his third wife drowned in their family pool, a heartbreaking accident stemming from alcoholism. The image of a frantic, devastated William Shatner standing before police cameras that night violently stripped away his perfect Hollywood facade. His profound loneliness at the pinnacle of success remains a bitter irony, standing in stark contrast to the proud captain persona of the past. Then, in a deeply ironic twist of fate, at the age of 90, Shatner actually reached space on a commercial flight. The whole world waited with bated breath for Captain Kirk to flash a triumphant smile as he finally touched the stars. But when he stepped out of the capsule, he didn't celebrate, he wept. With a trembling voice, he chillingly declared that all he saw out there in the void was death. In that moment, people realized that the invincible sci-fi hero of yesteryear was, in fact, just a small, fragile human being, confronting the haunting reality of our limited time. However, the most miraculous thing about William Shatner is his absolute refusal to let that darkness consume him. Contrary to the expectation that the aging captain would choose to retreat into seclusion after so much tragedy and painful reflection, the Shatner of today, now 95 years old, remains one of Hollywood's great survivors. Instead of fading into the background, he continues to work relentlessly, fiercely holding his ground in the spotlight. Audiences still see him regularly, no longer in flashy astronaut gear, but more grounded and profound as a narrator for mystery documentaries, writing books, recording, and occasionally popping up at major events to connect with fans. Time and emotional scars may have stripped away the sheer arrogance of James T. Kirk, but they have forged an unbelievably resilient William Shatner in real life. He doesn't hide from old age or death. He chooses to face it head-on by continuing to contribute. A deeply scarred man who understands the utter fragility of human existence to his core, yet remains determined to spend the final chapters of his life telling his story, shining brightly and completely until the curtain finally falls. Number 2. Nichelle Nichols. the tragic imprisonment of a civil rights icon. There are some actors who play a single role and end up changing an entire culture forever. That was Nichelle Nichols. When she took her place on the bridge of the USS Enterprise as Lieutenant Nyota Uhura, she wasn't just a communications officer. She was a living, breathing civil rights movement on the small screen. Powerful, razor-sharp, and radiant, Uhura became the ultimate symbol of equality that a divided America was desperately craving. In fact, when Nichelle considered leaving the series, it was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. himself who personally convinced her to stay. Her impact was so massive that it transcended Hollywood, directly inspiring NASA's very first generation of female astronauts. In the memories of millions, she will always be the woman who flew freely among the stars, bravely shattering every barrier in her path. But there is a brutal truth that showbiz rarely wants to face. Even the brightest stars are eventually dragged back down to Earth by the gravity of time, aging, and human greed. The final chapter of Nichelle Nichols' life wasn't a triumphant anthem. Instead, it was a heartbreaking portrait of imprisonment. Once a powerful woman who opened the doors of freedom for generations, she slowly lost her own independence as she fell victim to dementia. Yet the true tragedy, and the most shocking scandal of all, didn't stem from her illness, but from those closest to her. The final years of this absolute legend morphed into a dark, legal hell. A bitter, ruthless, and highly publicized conservatorship battle waged between her own biological son and her former manager. This scandal violently ripped away Hollywood's glamorous velvet curtain. Both sides relentlessly hurled severe accusations of emotional abuse, elder exploitation, and financial embezzlement. An icon who once stood up and fought for the civil rights of millions had now, with her fading mind, been reduced to a helpless pawn in a vicious tug-of-war for power and money right inside her own home. The absolute peak of this cruelty, and a glaring indictment of media ethics, came when the public eagerly consumed and exploited her vulnerability. When leaked footage surfaced online, showing Nichelle confused, screaming uncontrollably, and begging for help in a state of sheer panic, the public was absolutely horrified. Broadcasting the mental breakdown of a sick, elderly woman to millions of prying eyes was nothing short of a brutal violation of human dignity. It delivered a massive shock, serving as a heartbreaking irony and a stark, tragic contrast to the brilliant, powerful, and intensely proud Lieutenant Uhura we all knew. On a much deeper level, the Nichelle Nichols scandal stands as a terrifying, cautionary tale about the extreme fragility of our twilight years, a time when even the greatest among us can become helpless victims of petty, greedy agendas. But despite being dragged into that ugly vortex, her magnificent legacy remained utterly untarnished. When Nichelle Nichols passed away in 2022, the world mourned the loss of a legend, but also, perhaps, breathed a quiet sigh of relief that she had finally escaped that nightmare. Time, disease, and human greed had cruelly locked this liberating pioneer inside an invisible prison. But now, with her final breath, she was truly given her freedom back, resting peacefully and forever among the stars. Number 3. Grace Lee Whitney, the dark abuse scandal that destroyed a star. Stepping back in time to the very first season of Star Trek, standing out among the heavily male-dominated crew, one woman left a profound mark on the audience. Yeoman Janice Rand, played by actress Grace Lee Whitney. With her iconic beehive hair, striking beauty, and subtle yet fiery chemistry with Captain Kirk, she quickly became one of the most desired female characters on television. In the eyes of the public at that time, Grace Lee Whitney was holding a golden ticket to absolute stardom. Aboard the USS Enterprise, she was a blindingly bright star, carrying the promise of an incredibly radiant future in Hollywood. Yet, after a mere 8 episodes, the character of Janice Rand suddenly vanished without a single word of explanation. For decades, audiences naively believed it was simply a routine script change. It took a very long time after that for the velvet curtain to finally lift, exposing a horrifying truth. Her disappearance wasn't a creative setback. It was the result of one of the most brutal and filthy behind-the-scenes realities. In her tear-filled memoir, Grace painfully revealed that she was the victim of a horrific abuse of power at the hands of a powerful television executive. And as a cruel punishment designed to silence the victim, just days after that tragedy, she was suspiciously written out of the show, entirely stripped of her future, discarded by the very industry she had dedicated herself to, carrying the crushing weight of severe psychological trauma and an unspeakable injustice. Grace went into a freefall, plunging into the abyss. The once glamorous woman turned to drugs and alcohol to numb her agonizing pain. Her life spiraled completely out of control as she plummeted from a highly promising star to rock bottom, struggling to survive the darkest days of addiction, drifting through the impoverished streets of Skid Row. But Grace Lee Whitney's story does not end in ruins. Pushing through the absolute depths of despair, she achieved something truly magnificent. She pulled herself up from the ashes. When she finally got clean, Grace didn't choose resentment, nor did she beg Hollywood to give her back the spotlight. Instead, she used her bleeding wounds as a foundation, dedicating the entire rest of her life to visiting prisons and rehab centers, rescuing lost souls who shared her painful fate. When she quietly passed away in 2015, the world bid farewell to a former actress. But for those who truly understand her story, Grace Lee Whitney was never a victim destroyed by Hollywood. She was a true warrior, someone who walked through the most brutal darkness of abuse to ignite the brightest and most precious light of all, the light of rebirth and compassion. Number 4. George Takei, breaking free from Hollywood's dark invisible prison. Looking back at the 1960s, a time when Asian actors were often pigeonholed into stereotypical and crude roles, George Takei proudly stepped onto the bridge of the USS Enterprise and changed history. As the helmsman Hikaru Sulu, he was a revolutionary leap forward, shattering racial barriers on national television. Audiences remember him as a calm hero, freely piloting a massive vessel across 1,000 stars. On screen, he was the embodiment of absolute freedom. Yet, the most brutal irony of Hollywood was that it sold audiences a sci-fi dream of infinite liberty, while ruthlessly suffocating the real people behind the camera. The truth is, while Sulu was freely exploring the galaxy, George Takei was being held captive in a dark and stifling invisible prison for decades. As a gay man living in a conservative entertainment empire rife with prejudice, Takei had to grit his teeth and hide his true self. He lived in constant, agonizing fear every single day that just one rumor or one leaked photo would be enough to instantly strip away the career he had painstakingly built with blood and tears. Once a boy deprived of his freedom in a Japanese-American internment camp during World War II, he became a star only to find himself forced back into a cage behind the glamorous facade of Hollywood. To keep his spotlight, he had to pay the price of a suffocating and painful repression. But the real detonator in Takei's story doesn't lie in his past endurance, but in a spectacular late-life pivot. At 68 years old, when many of his peers had chosen to retreat into retirement, he decided to personally smash the walls of that invisible prison. He came out, standing tall as he married his partner, Brad Altman. And the most unbelievable part? His career didn't collapse. Instead, it witnessed a shocking rebirth. Far from the reserved supporting actor of the past, the George Takei of today, now approaching 90, is a loud and brilliant pop culture phenomenon. Rather than stepping back from the limelight, he dominates the social media era with millions of followers, brought his life story to Broadway through the musical Allegiance, continuously voices major projects, writes books, and has become a tireless warrior on the front lines of human rights. For George Takei, time didn't make him old, it set him free. His greatest voyage, in the end, wasn't into the vastness of space, but the courage to step out of the shadows to live a life that is authentic, radiant, and free under the sun. Number 5. Walter Koenig, heartbreaking tragedy behind the teen idol's smile. When he joined Star Trek in its second season, Walter Koenig arrived with a clear mission: to inject a burst of youthful energy into the USS Enterprise. With his iconic shaggy mop-top hair and a beaming smile, his character, Pavel Chekhov, quickly became a bona fide heartthrob, capturing the hearts of a massive teenage fan base. To audiences in the 1960s, Koenig was the missing piece of the puzzle, representing innocence, burning passion, and boundless vitality amidst the vast unknown of space. Yet, as the shimmering glow of his teen idol years began to fade, life challenged him with its most cruel and agonizing undertones. Although he eventually proved his dramatic range through much grittier roles later in his career, that youthful smile was forever eclipsed by a soul-crushing tragedy. In 2010, the world watched in horror as his son, actor Andrew Koenig, went missing and was later discovered to have taken his own life after a long and silent battle with depression. The haunting image of Walter Koenig and his wife standing before the press, eyes red from weeping, voices trembling as they begged those struggling with mental health to seek help, remains one of the industry's most devastating moments. In an instant, the carefree young ensign from the screen was forged by unimaginable pain into a father carrying a permanent, invisible wound. Today, at the age of 89, Koenig lives a much more quiet and reflective life. He now uses the somber echoes of his personal loss to speak out powerfully on behalf of mental health awareness. Time may have blurred the image of the flashy teen idol, but it has left behind a man of profound compassion, someone who truly understands the deepest cost of being human behind the ruthless glare of the spotlight. Number 6. Leonard Nimoy, Escaping the Shadow, A Fight for True Identity. In 1966, the pointed ears and cold, calculating logic of Mr. Spock transformed Leonard Nimoy into the very soul of Star Trek. But behind that astronomical fame lay a suffocating sense of entrapment. For decades, Nimoy fought a desperate public battle to escape Spock's colossal shadow, even causing an uproar with his 1975 autobiography, boldly titled, "I Am Not Spock," in a fierce attempt to reclaim his own identity. Yet, the most profound chapter of his life was the journey toward acceptance. Years later, Nimoy finally found peace, realizing that Spock was never a cage, but a beautiful, inseparable part of his own spirit. He successfully pivoted to directing and fine art photography, becoming the only original cast member to bridge the gap and anchor the franchise's modern reboots. Even as he battled COPD in his final years, a consequence of a long-term smoking habit, Nimoy remained remarkably serene and wise. His final tweet, reflecting on the fleeting nature of perfect moments, became a poetic masterpiece that closed the journey of a star who finally found true freedom by embracing his own legacy. Number 7. James Doohan. Fading Mind, A Hero's Final Journey to Space. In the Star Trek universe, Montgomery Scotty Scott was the devoted chief engineer, the man who was always there at just the right moment to beam up and save the USS Enterprise from its most perilous situations. But few realize that in real life, James Doohan was an actual hero, a World War II veteran who was shot multiple times during the historic D-Day invasion. Audiences remember him not just for the legendary catchphrase, "Beam me up, Scotty," but for the sheer resilience and unwavering loyalty that radiated from the man himself. Yet, the greatest enemy this hero ever faced didn't come from a battlefield or a sci-fi void. It was the slow fading of his own memories. Doohan's final years were clouded by the onset of Alzheimer's and Parkinson's disease. The image of the once resourceful Scotty gradually grew quiet as his mind began to let go of the very legacy he had helped build. Though his life ended in silence, his story reached a perfect and breathtaking finale. After his passing in 2005, James Doohan's ashes were launched into space and brought to the International Space Station, ISS. The chief engineer of the Enterprise finally embarked on his eternal voyage among the stars, the place where he truly belonged, leaving behind the echo of a life fully dedicated to both real-world ideals and the furthest reaches of our imagination. Number 8. DeForest Kelley, the quiet escape from Hollywood's ruthless spotlight. Within the big three of the USS Enterprise, if Kirk was the intellect and Spock was the logic, then DeForest Kelley's Dr. Leonard Bones McCoy was undoubtedly the heart. Audiences adored him for his crusty, cantankerous exterior that shielded a soul of pure compassion and humanity. Bones was more than just a doctor. He was the emotional anchor, the one who constantly reminded us what it truly meant to be human in the vast, cold reaches of space. Yet, in a striking departure from his co-stars, many of whom were entangled in public feuds or bitter legal battles, DeForest Kelley chose a path of extraordinary peace. He stands as a rare example of a Hollywood star who mastered his fame rather than letting it consume him. Once the blinding spotlight of Star Trek began to dim, he didn't go chasing flashy projects or desperate attempts to stay relevant at any cost. Instead, Kelley quietly retreated into a modest, deeply private life, finding true happiness alongside his wife of over 50 years. He spent his final chapters tending to his garden, writing poetry, and embracing the stillness he had always craved. When he passed away peacefully in 1999, the entire industry held its breath in a moment of absolute respect. DeForest Kelley left behind no shocking scandals. Instead, he left the lasting echo of a man who chose to bow out with dignity, proving that a star's greatest victory is sometimes simply finding peace once the stage lights finally go down. Which Star Trek icon's journey shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments, and subscribe so you never miss the truth behind the fame.